How to identify a good vintage watch. Guys, in today's video, I'm going to help you guys learn how I spot and buy my vintage watches. Today, guys, I'm having Copper Mug. This is a coffee shop here in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. They make excellent coffee, so I recommend you guys, if you're ever in Williamsburg, go check out Copper Mug. But anyways, guys, remember to give the video a thumbs up, share it, and hit the subscribe button if you haven't subscribed yet. Now, let's get into the video. So I want to start off by saying, to be successful in vintage watch collecting, you need to love doing research. You need to enjoy doing homework. I know the word homework may be triggering to some of you guys. You're probably getting flashbacks to back in middle school, but trust me, this is the type of homework that you're going to enjoy. To be honest with you guys, the researching and the learning is one of the best parts of vintage watch collecting, and also the actual hunt to get the timepiece. Now guys, here's one of the first things to do before getting into vintage watch collecting. First, identify a brand that you're gonna love and enjoy. And in order to do this, you're gonna have to learn the history of the company and the brand. And I must add, please don't think that to get a good vintage watch, it needs to be Rolex. You need to understand what the company was going through during that time period when that watch was made. You need to learn who the designer of the case was. You can also learn what type of movement was in the timepiece and who was making the movements for that particular watch. Because sometimes when it comes to the movement, the actual company doesn't make the movement. For example, with Rolex, Zenith made some of Rolex's movement, specifically with the Daytona. So in doing your research on these watches, you need to analyze photos online. Look at different pictures so you can identify inconsistencies and be able to know when parts are original and when parts are aftermarket. Next, when it comes to vintage watch collecting, you need to focus on condition. And there's three areas that I look at when it comes to the condition of a vintage watch. It's the dial, the case, and the movement. Let's start with the case. When it comes to the case of a vintage timepiece, the case can be polished. But if you come across one that's unpolished, great, congrats. But if the case is polished, just make sure that it's polished correctly. Make sure you can see some of the original lines of the timepiece, and also make sure the polish is correct. So if the lugs have a brush finish when it was original, make sure that right now when you buy it, it's also brushed in the areas where it's supposed to be brushed, and in the areas where it's supposed to have a high polish, it has a high polish. Now for the dial. It's important to find a dial that's original to the timepiece, where the dial matches the hands on this watch. Make sure you can identify an original dial from a refinished dial. A refinished dial is just whenever a dial was reprinted or repainted. Some dials, vintage dials specifically, tend to fade over the years, and some people, unfortunately, decides to reprint and repaint on the dial to make it look like brand new. With these dials, just try to avoid them at all costs. Next, let's talk about the movement. When it comes to movement, this could get a little bit technical, so you really have to do your homework. First, go online and Google some photos. Look at some of the pictures so that you could identify inconsistencies and original and aftermarket parts. And to be honest, if this is a little too technical for you, sure, enjoy doing your research and your homework. But when it comes to movement, make sure you take it to a watchmaker so that he can look it over and give you the okay. But if you could learn the movements and understand certain calibers and what to look for and how to match specific calibers with specific references, you're going to be on the right track. My next point is learning the history of the timepiece. Now, the only way you can really do this is when you buy a timepiece from the first owner, from the old guy that purchased it back in the 50s and 60s. That's the only way you can learn the actual history and the service history of the timepiece. But if that's not the case, don't let that be a reason for you to not purchase a vintage watch. From my experience of purchasing vintage timepieces throughout the years, I've never had a bad experience, especially buying a timepiece where I don't know the history and specifically the service history. Don't let that be a reason you turn down a timepiece. I've came across numerous Rolex timepieces that haven't been serviced in 50 to 60 years. Damn. And they kept good time. So that's just an example that the service history isn't that important. Now with some timepieces, it is, because some timepieces require frequent and regular servicing in order for it to run well and keep good time. But there's other timepieces that have movements that tend to be robust and could take a beating. My last point is papers. When it comes to papers with vintage timepieces, I'm 50-50.
Is this safe driving to Baghdad?
Yes, very safe. 50-50.
50-50, what, like 50% we live, 50% we die?
In all honesty, when a timepiece doesn't have papers, it doesn't turn me away from purchasing the timepiece because I plan on wearing the watch, not the papers. There are some instances, yes, where papers will be great, especially if it's a rare timepiece, a one of one, or something that's honestly just rare that you don't come across often. Where having the complete set just makes it perfect, where you can actually tell the story of the timepiece with all the paperwork that comes with it. That's good and all. But if the timepiece is great and it doesn't come with papers, don't let that turn you away, like I said before. Buy the watch, enjoy the watch, and if you ever come across another model similar to the watch that it comes with papers, that's your choice then to sell the one that you have and buy the one with the complete set. Guys, I'm gonna leave the video here. Hopefully you guys could take away some points that you could apply to your vintage watch collecting. Comment down below any points that you guys could add to some of you guys who buy vintage watches on how someone could go about buying vintage watches. Thanks for watching. Remember, give the video a like, share it, subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and stay tuned for some more videos.